No one noticed the boy the first day he arrived, and that was exactly how life had trained him to survive. He stood at the school gate long after the bell had rung, clutching a thin brown envelope against his chest, his fingers curled so tightly around it that the paper bent at the edges. The gatekeeper barely looked at him, just waved him through with irritation, already tired of late students and excuses. The boy slipped inside quietly, his worn sandals scraping against the concrete as he crossed into a world that felt far too clean, far too loud, and far too expensive for someone like him. His name was Eli. He was 14 years old, thin in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than sickness, and his uniform, though clean, hung loosely on his body, the fabric faded and patched in places where time had torn it apart, and his hands had stitched it back together. He had learned early that appearances mattered, even when money didn't exist, and so every morning before dawn, he washed that uniform carefully, pressing it flat beneath his mattress at night so it would look sharp by morning. The school was called St. Gregory's College, a place known for producing lawyers, politicians, and men whose names appeared on plaques and buildings long after they were gone. It wasn't a school for boys like Eli. Everyone knew that, including him. As he walked through the courtyard, eyes followed him briefly, then moved on. Some students laughed loudly, comparing phones, shoes, weekend plans. Others complained about drivers arriving late or parents being annoying. Eli listened without meaning to, absorbing a world that felt fictional, like a story he was allowed to hear but never enter. He found his classroom at the far end of the building. The teacher paused when he walked in, looked him up and down, then sighed softly. "You're late." "I'm sorry, sir," Eli said, his voice low, steady, practiced. The teacher glanced at the register. Name? Eli Adeyemi. A pause, a flick of the pen, a small nod. Sit. And just like that, Eli became part of St. Gregory's. No one asked where he came from. No one asked how he got there. And most importantly, no one asked how he planned to pay. That question would come later, much later. St. Gregory's ran on money the way the human body ran on blood. Fees were high, deadlines strict, and mercy rare. Every term, without fail, the list came out. Names of students whose fees hadn't been paid in full. Names read aloud in assembly. Names followed by shame. Eli had seen it happen at his old school. He had seen boys cry as they were sent home, watched teachers turn cold, watched friendships dissolve under the weight of embarrassment. He knew the ritual well. That was why, on the first day of the new term, when the bursar stepped onto the assembly ground with a clipboard in hand, Eli's stomach tightened. The sun was already hot, pressing down on rows of students standing shoulder to shoulder. Sweat rolled down backs, collars, temples. The bursar cleared his throat. "The following students are to report to the office immediately after assembly," he announced. Names followed, one by one. Some students groaned. Others froze. A few laughed nervously, pretending not to care. Eli stood still, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement in front of him. The list ended. The bursar closed the clipboard. Eli was still standing. At first, he thought he hadn't heard properly. He waited, heart pounding, expecting his name to be added as an afterthought. It wasn't. Around him, movement erupted. Students stepped out of line, whispers broke into full conversations, and the normal chaos of dismissal followed. Eli remained where he was until the student beside him nudged his arm. "You're not going?" Eli blinked. "Going where?" "The office, for fees." The boy looked him over, clearly confused. "They didn't call your name." Eli nodded slowly, as if accepting something that had already been decided somewhere beyond him. "No," he said, "they didn't." That was the first time it happened. The second time, people noticed. By midterm, St. Gregory's was buzzing with the usual tension. Parents had missed deadlines, businesses had stalled, promises had been broken. The list was longer this time. Students were called out in batches. Some protested, some begged for time. A few stormed off angrily, phones already pressed to their ears. Eli watched it all quietly from his seat. When the last name was read, someone laughed. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. "Wait," a voice said loudly. "What about him? Heads turned. Eli felt it before he saw it, the sudden attention, the weight of eyes pressing in. The bursar frowned, scanned the register again, then shook his head. His fees are settled. The laughter died instantly. Settled? That word echoed louder than any name. By lunch, the whispers had started. How? By who? Isn't he the poor one? Eli ate alone that day, as he always did, sitting beneath the old mango tree at the edge of the compound. His lunch was simple bread and water, but he chewed slowly, deliberately, as if stretching the act could quiet the noise around him. He had learned long ago that curiosity could be dangerous. At home, curiosity had cost his mother her peace. Eli lived behind a mechanic's workshop on the outskirts of town. The room he slept in was barely large enough for a mattress and a wooden crate. At night, the smell of oil and rust mixed with the scent of damp earth. During the day, the noise of metal and engines filled the air. It wasn't always like that. Once, there had been laughter. Once, there had been stories told by lantern light. Once, there had been a woman who sang while she cooked, even when there was little to cook. His mother, she died quietly, the way poor people often do. No hospital, no dramatic final words, just a slow fading, a hand growing cold in his, a promise he didn't fully understand at the time. "Pay attention," she had whispered. "Listen. People talk when they think no one is listening." Eli had nodded, tears blurring his vision. He hadn't known then that those words would become his currency. After her death, survival became a skill, and listening became his greatest one. He cleaned offices at night, ran errands, did small jobs no one wanted, and everywhere he went, people talked. They complained, they boasted, they confessed. They never noticed the quiet boy in the corner. At St. Gregory's, Eli listened more than ever. He listened to teachers arguing in empty classrooms. He listened to parents speaking sharply on phones during PTA meetings. He listened to drivers gossiping while waiting in cars. He listened because listening had kept him alive. And one evening, while cleaning the administrative block long after sunset, he heard something he wasn't meant to. Two voices, low, urgent, names, numbers, money that didn't belong to anyone standing in that room. Eli stood frozen, mop in hand, heart racing as the words settled into his mind, clear and sharp. He didn't understand all of it at first, but he understood enough to know it mattered. Enough to know it was dangerous. Enough to know it could change things. The next morning, his school fees were marked paid. No receipt, no explanation, just paid. By the end of the term, Eli's name carried a strange weight. People stopped calling him that poor boy. They called him lucky. Some called him protected. Others avoided him entirely. No one asked him directly. They didn't need to. Because somewhere deep down, they sensed it too. The boy who had nothing had something they didn't. The first time someone came looking for Eli on purpose, it was not out of kindness. It was during the third week of the term, on a day when the heat pressed down so heavily that even the loudest students had grown quiet. Classes had ended early, and the compound buzzed with restless energy as boys hurried toward waiting cars or clustered beneath trees. Eli was packing his books when a shadow fell across his desk. "Follow me." The voice was calm, controlled, and unfamiliar. Eli looked up to see a man he had never spoken to before, but had seen many times, Mr. Kareem, one of the senior administrative officers, a man who wore expensive watches and smiled too often during assemblies, a man who always smelled faintly of cologne and authority. Eli nodded, slipped his books into his bag, and stood. They walked in silence, down the corridor, past empty classrooms, toward the administrative block. Every step felt heavier than the last. Inside the office, the door closed softly behind them. Mr. Kareem gestured for Eli to sit, then took his own seat across the desk, folding his hands neatly. "You're a quiet boy," he said. Eli said nothing. "I like quiet boys," the man continued. "They listen." Eli's chest tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sir," he replied. Mr. Kareem leaned back. "Tell me something, Eli. Do you know how many students would do anything to stay in this school?" Eli nodded slowly. "Do you know how many parents beg, cry, And threaten because of school fees? Yes, sir. And yet, Mr. Kareem said gently, you never seem to have that problem. Silence settled between them, thick and watchful. Mr. Kareem opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file. He didn't open it, he just placed it on the desk. People talk, he said. They notice patterns, and patterns raise questions. Eli stared at the file. I don't want questions, Mr. Kareem continued. Questions make people uncomfortable. I prefer solutions. He leaned forward. So tell me, Eli, what exactly do you know? Eli's heart beat once, hard. He thought of his mother's voice. Pay attention. Listen, I know, Eli said carefully. What people say when they think they are alone. Mr. Kareem smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. That's very interesting, he said. Because people like me, we don't like being misunderstood. Eli looked up then, meeting his gaze. I don't misunderstand, he said quietly. I remember. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mr. Kareem laughed softly. Smart boy. He slid the file back into the drawer and stood. Go, he said. For now. Eli rose, bowed his head slightly, and left. That night, Eli did not sleep. He lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the workshop outside, the clang of metal, the murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter. Each sound felt sharper, closer, as if the world had narrowed around him. He understood something now. Listening was no longer enough. People were starting to notice that he knew. The next payment cleared 2 days later. No message, no explanation, just confirmation. By the end of the term, the pattern had solidified. Whenever Eli overheard something serious, something people wanted buried, his fees were taken care of shortly afterward. It was never discussed openly. No one approached him directly. Instead, conversations shifted when he entered a room. Eyes lingered longer than before. Fear has a way of recognizing itself. One afternoon, while sweeping the staff room, Eli heard 2 teachers arguing in hushed voices. The door was half closed. They hadn't noticed him yet. You can't keep doing this, one whispered sharply. I don't have a choice, the other replied. If the board finds out. Eli moved quietly, his broom gliding across the floor as if he were invisible. Names, dates, a falsified report. That evening, Eli wrote everything down in a small notebook he kept hidden beneath his mattress. He didn't know why he wrote things down at first. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a way of convincing himself that what he heard was real. The notebook filled quickly, and with each page, the weight inside him grew heavier. At school, people treated him differently now. Some were overly kind, others were distant. A few watched him with thinly veiled suspicion. One boy confronted him openly. How are you paying your fees? Eli looked at him calmly. I don't talk about that. The boy scoffed. You think you're special? No, Eli said. I think I'm careful. The rumors spread anyway. Some said he had a secret sponsor. Others said he was related to someone powerful. A few whispered darker things that he stole, that he blackmailed, that he was dangerous. Eli didn't correct them, because the truth was worse. The truth was that adults, powerful, respected adults, were afraid of a boy who listened. One evening, as Eli walked home from school, he noticed footsteps behind him. Slow, measured. He didn't turn around. He kept walking. The footsteps followed. His heart began to race, but his pace remained steady. He had learned long ago that panic invited danger. At the turn near the workshop, the footsteps stopped. Eli paused, then turned. The street was empty, but carved into the wooden door of his room later that night were 2 words, shallow but deliberate. Stop listening. Eli traced the letters with his fingers, his throat tight. That was the moment he understood something else. Secrets were no longer just a way to survive. They were a trap. From that night on, Eli slept lightly. Every sound woke him. Every shadow felt alive. But he continued to listen, because stopping meant losing everything. And then came the secret that changed the rules. The one he never meant to hear. The one that involved the school itself. He heard it during a late-night cleaning shift hidden behind a filing cabinet, his heart pounding as voices spoke freely in the dark. This secret was bigger. This one could destroy lives. Eli's hands trembled as he wrote it down later, the pen digging into the paper. For the first time, he wondered if some things were too heavy for a boy to carry. And as he lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, one question echoed louder than any fear. What happens when the price of silence becomes higher than the price of truth? By the time Eli understood the size of the secret he was carrying, it was already too late to put it down. He walked through the school halls the next morning with the strange awareness that comes when you know something powerful people would do anything to erase. Every smile felt forced. Every greeting sounded hollow. Even the walls of St. Gregory's seemed to listen differently now, as though the building itself knew it was standing on rot disguised as prestige. The secret sat heavy in his chest, pressing against his ribs with every breath. He had not slept. His notebook lay hidden beneath his mattress, its pages filled with names, dates, conversations, whispered behind closed doors. He had never intended to collect so much. It had started as survival. It had become something else. A weapon. Eli did not like that word, but he could not deny the truth of it. In class, he stared at the blackboard without seeing the chalk. His mind replayed the voices from the night before, the principal's voice among them. Calm, confident, corrupt. Selling examination questions to wealthy parents, altering records, ensuring that certain names would always succeed while others were quietly pushed aside. St. Gregory's pride rested on lies, and Eli knew every one of them. At lunch, he sat beneath the mango tree as usual, but today, no one came near him. Even the boldest students kept their distance. Fear had sharpened its instincts. Rumors had grown teeth. They say he knows things. They say people pay him. They say he's dangerous. Eli watched ants crawl along the roots of the tree, carrying crumbs many times their size. He wondered how something so small could carry something so heavy without breaking. The answer came sooner than he expected. That afternoon, he was summoned again. This time, it wasn't Mr. Kareem. It was the principal himself. The office felt colder than before, despite the heat outside. The curtains were drawn, the lights dim. The principal sat behind his desk, hands folded, eyes sharp with a calm that felt rehearsed. "Sit down, Eli," he said. Eli obeyed. "I've been hearing your name," the principal began. "Quite often." Eli said nothing. "They say you listen very well," the man continued. "That you notice things others miss." Eli met his gaze. "People talk." The principal smiled faintly. "Yes, they do." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Eli, what have you heard recently?" The air thickened. Eli's heart hammered against his chest, but his face remained still. He had learned long ago that fear revealed too much. "I hear many things," he said carefully. The principal nodded. "And you write them down." Eli froze. Just for a second. It was enough. The principal's smile widened. "You see, Eli, information is a dangerous thing. In the wrong hands, it can destroy institutions, reputations, futures." Eli thought of his own future. How fragile it was. How easily it could disappear. "I don't want to destroy anything," Eli said. "I just want to stay in school." The principal leaned back, studying him. "And you have," he said, "thanks to certain arrangements." Eli felt the unspoken words settle between them. Blackmail, payment, silence. "Tell me," the principal said softly, "what would happen if someone found that notebook of yours?" Eli's throat tightened. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I do," the principal replied. "You'd be expelled, arrested, labeled a liar, and no one would believe a poor boy over respected men." Eli knew this already. "That's why," the principal continued, "I think we should help each other." He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a scholarship form, fully funded. Tuition, accommodation, everything. Eli stared at it. "All you have to do," the principal said, "is forget what you think you heard." Forget. The word felt heavier than any threat. Eli thought of his mother again, of her final breath, of her warning. People talk when they think no one is listening. He pushed the envelope back. "I can't," he said. The principal's eyes hardened. "You should be careful," he warned. "Boys who don't know their place tend to disappear." Eli stood up slowly. "I know my place," he said quietly. "I'm just tired of it." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. That night, Eli's room was searched. He knew before he even stepped inside. The mattress had been moved, the crate overturned, papers scattered. The notebook was gone. Eli sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and felt something inside him crack, not loudly, but completely. The fear he had carried for so long dissolved into something colder. Resolve. They had crossed a line. And now, so would he. The next morning, the school woke to chaos. An anonymous package arrived at the board's office. Inside were copies, recordings, transcripts, proof. Not everything, just enough. Classes were suspended. Meetings were called. Parents flooded the compound. Whispers turned into shouts. Authority began to tremble. Eli watched it all unfold from a distance, his face calm, his heart racing. He had released the truth. But truth is never neat. By afternoon, the principal was gone. Mr. Kareem avoided eye contact. Teachers spoke in hushed tones. The board announced an investigation. And Eli was summoned once more. This time the room was full. Board members, lawyers, faces tight with panic and curiosity. They looked at him like he was a puzzle they hadn't planned for. "Why did you do it?" one of them asked. Eli took a breath. "Because I was tired of paying with silence," he said. The room fell quiet. For the first time in his life, Eli was not invisible. He was seen. And that terrified him more than being ignored ever had. Because once the truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back. And Eli knew deep down that the story was not over yet. Not even close. The days that followed felt unreal, like Eli was walking through someone else's life while his own watched from a distance. St. Gregory's was no longer the polished institution it once pretended to be. The gates that used to open smoothly each morning now groaned under the weight of reporters, parents, and officials who came with questions no one could easily answer. The walls that had absorbed whispers for years were now echoing with voices raised in anger, disbelief, and fear. Eli kept going to school, though no one had told him he had to. No one had told him he was allowed to either. Teachers avoided his eyes. Some looked at him with something like gratitude, others with open resentment. A few looked afraid. He noticed all of it, the way he always did, but this time the information did not settle neatly into his mind. It scattered, sharp, and overwhelming. For the first time, listening did not feel like power. It felt like standing in the middle of a storm. The board called another meeting 2 days later. This time, they sent a car for him. A black sedan pulled up outside the mechanic's workshop just after dawn. Eli stood barefoot in the dirt, staring at it, his heart beating steadily but loudly. He had not slept. He hadn't needed to. His mind had been awake for days. The driver stepped out and opened the door without a word. Inside, the air smelled of leather and something faintly sweet. Eli sat stiffly, hands folded in his lap, watching the town pass by through tinted windows. People were already awake. Life was continuing. It always did. The meeting room was large, cold, and too clean. Men in suits sat around a long table, their faces drawn, tired. A woman with sharp eyes gestured for Eli to sit. "Do you understand why you're here?" she asked. Eli nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You've caused quite a disruption," another voice said. Not angry, measured. Eli looked at the table instead of the faces. "I told the truth." A pause followed. "And what gave you the right?" someone asked. Eli lifted his head slowly. "What gave them the right?" he asked back. The room fell silent. For the first time since this began, Eli saw something shift. Not sympathy, not approval, recognition. They asked him everything. How he knew, how long he had known, why he hadn't spoken sooner, why he had accepted payment instead of reporting it immediately. Eli answered honestly. "I was hungry," he said. I wanted to stay in school. I was afraid." No one interrupted him. When he finished, the woman with sharp eyes leaned forward. "You're very young," she said. "You shouldn't have had to carry this." Eli said nothing. "You will not be punished," she continued. "In fact, the board has approved a full scholarship for you. Here, and beyond." She slid a document across the table. Eli stared at it. Once, that piece of paper would have meant everything. Now, it felt strangely light. "What about the others?" he asked, quietly. The woman hesitated. "What others?" "The ones who were sent home," Eli said. "The ones who failed because they weren't rich enough to buy answers." No one spoke. Eli understood then that truth could open doors, but it did not rebuild what had already been destroyed. He signed the papers anyway, because survival still mattered. The principal was arrested a week later. Mr. Kareem resigned before charges could be filed. Names were removed from plaques. Promises were made. Apologies were issued. St. Gregory's vowed change. Eli returned to school under a different kind of attention. Some students stared at him like he was a hero. Others looked away, as if his presence reminded them of something uncomfortable. He sat under the mango tree one last time before graduation, watching the leaves sway in the breeze. The notebook was gone. The secrets were out. And for the first time in years, his mind was quiet. That night he packed his few belongings. The room behind the workshop no longer felt like home, but it no longer felt like a prison either. He left before dawn, the sky just beginning to lighten, the world holding its breath. Years later, people would tell his story in fragments. They would say he was brilliant. They would say he was brave. They would say he was dangerous. Very few would say he was just a boy. Eli never spoke publicly about what he had done. He didn't need to. He learned to study systems instead of secrets, to expose patterns instead of people. He chose a life where truth was used to protect, not trade. Sometimes, late at night, he still remembered the sound of whispered conversations, the weight of knowing too much. But he also remembered something else. The moment he stopped paying with silence. The moment he chose to be seen. And that was the day the poor boy finally stopped surviving and began to live.